You're listening to Counselors on the Couch, an open conversation between counselors, coaches, and specialists discussing how people just like you can solve a multitude of challenges. Counselors on the Couch is hosted by Dr. Chuck Carrington. We invite you now to join us on the couch to listen in as Dr. Chuck and his specialist guests and experts candidly share insider information on how they help solve the problems that drive people into counseling.
Welcome back to Counselors on the Couch. This week, we're continuing our 12-part discussion on surviving the traumas of divorce. I'm Dr. Chuck Carrington, and with me again this week is Kathy Ahearn, a 17-year veteran in leading divorce support through the Christian ministry of DivorceCare, along with Dr. James Strickland, who is also a co-facilitator in a DivorceCare group. Both are local here in Virginia Beach. Our topic today is healing the traumas that come with divorce. Healing begins only when you understand what is happening and come to a place where you can begin to accept the new realities that divorce forces on you. Last week, in part 1, we discussed the many forms of loss and trauma that comes with divorce and considered how to begin making the intolerable tolerable if divorce becomes necessary in your life, and then doing your best to navigate the demands of divorce. This week, my colleagues and I are going to discuss the process of healing. Kathy and James, welcome back.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. So last week's topic was a bit harsh, I think, for people to hear because we really gave some candid descriptions of the traumas that come with divorce, and we challenged some of the false assumptions that people tend to use to psychologically avoid those traumas, at least as long as they can. And after the show, we were talking about how heavy it sounded, but we also agreed it was something that needed to be said. So before we start talking about the healing process, I'm just wondering whether either of you feel like you have anything you want to share about last week's experience and maybe add from our conversation.
In the book, Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about what he calls the Stockdale paradox. And Admiral James Stockdale was in the Hanoi Hilton for 7 years and during the Vietnam War. And he talked about in that book that there were soldiers who were POWs there who didn't survive. And one of the reasons that they didn't survive is because they lost hope. You know, they thought that he would be out by Christmas and Christmas would come and go and they were still prisoners and they would lose hope and just give up and die. And in the book, Jim Collins forms what he calls a Stockdale paradox, which is you have to face the brutal facts of your current reality with an unwavering faith that in the end you will prevail. That's what this is. You have to face the brutal facts of your current reality, and they're horrible, and they are disastrous, and they're gut-wrenching. But somewhere you have to somehow you have to gather yourself together and believe in an unwavering hope that in the end you will prevail.
That's well said.
And one other thing, there's a word that people hear and will hear continually throughout the program. The word is process. People come to hate that word when we tell them it's a process. It takes a while. You can't rush it. And then also another P word, which is patience. It requires a lot of patience as you're going through this because you've got to sit with it. You can't go around it. You have to go through it.
That's a good point, Kathy. And if you don't go through it, you'll get the opportunity at some point in your life to repeat it again. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you see in a lot of couples who get divorced. You know, the divorce rate for first marriages is almost 50%. The divorce rate for second marriages is almost 75%. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is because people didn't take the time to go through the process, to heal, to do what they needed to do a really good evaluation, audit of their life, their values, an analysis of what got them here. A really root cause examination of what contribution they made to this horrific tragedy.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. And people tend to avoid the grief process. They tend to avoid the confrontation as a self-preservation instinct. Mm-hmm. But in the long run, you're not really preserving yourself. What you're doing is you're preserving the trauma. Mm-hmm. And they don't get that. So that's a great segue. Our discussion today is going to be about healing, and we're going to talk about the process of healing. So I think that was going to work out great. Before we actually start talking about healing, I wanted to illustrate. I know James has a unique way of illustrating divorce, something to do with a meat grinder, but I have my own method of explaining to people what it's like. And I want to talk about that real briefly, if you give me just a minute to pontificate. I've always looked at divorce as the tearing apart of a conjoined life, to rend it apart, to separate it, and leave scars. And like any other major loss, a divorce requires grief. Grieving is necessary when there is a major loss. And when divorce is chosen, or whether it's forced upon you, there is a loss. And the rending of these two lives, the separating of the couple from this conjoined existence back into two separate existences, is never neat or tidy. Even though we think it might be and we try to make it that way, it's not. And so I like to think of it as the process of ripping as well as a surgical division. The ripping part is the trauma of losing the dreams, the companionships, all the things that the marriage represented. So that's the emotional side. The surgical division is the settlement of assets, the parenting agreements, the court process, all those legal steps that are needed to void the marriage contract. And the attorneys are great at the surgical part. But what they tend to do is they tend to increase the damage of the ripping away process. The tearing up of the relationship is not something that an attorney is either paid or trained to do. They're to break the contract. And I think before I go on, I just wanted to get some input, if either of you have it, on this, the attorney versus your emotional needs. Do you see a lot of that when you're talking to people in your divorce groups?
I think sometimes when people go to an attorney, they are, whether consciously or not, thinking they are going to receive other help from the attorney other than just the legality, just those things. And so they go into it subconsciously thinking they're going to help me through this process. And as you pointed out, this is the surgical part of it. It is separated from the emotional ripping that takes place. And it would be helpful when you approach an attorney to know they're not really there. They may be looking out for your interest as a client, but they're not looking out for your heart in this process. And going into it with that expectation and trusting them in that way, I think you can set yourself up for more damage.
That's a really good point.
As I said last week, divorce is a civil act versus a criminal act, but there's really nothing civil about it. These attorneys, the average divorce attorney will be $300 to $400 an hour. They charge in 6-minute increments. They are there to execute your will and your wishes in separating the marriage and to protect your interest that had been accrued and developed within the marriage. If you spend time giving them details about the emotional side, they're happy to listen. But just remember that every 6 minutes, it just costs you $36.
Mm-hmm.
And they track it that closely. But it's such an horrific experience that you feel like you have to talk to someone, and you feel like you have to explain not only what happened, but you also have to explain yourself to some degree, because no one wants to be thought poorly of. But it's a very, very expensive process. Mm-hmm. And it really doesn't address, on one hand, the totality of what you're going to be experiencing.
I hadn't thought about it till you just said it, actually. But when you're grieving, your normal inclination is to talk about your grief. And you need someone to talk to. And I think it would be natural to look to your attorney and think, here's somebody who understands, here's somebody I can talk to. And you're going to use them to express to it. While it's probably something that you're compelled to do, it's probably not therapeutically valuable to you, because that's not what they're there for. They'll look at you and they'll say, great, we're going to get you the best deal we can. Mm-hmm. But that's not what you're looking for. You're trying to deal with the heart while they're dealing with the surgery. The process I like to use as an example when I'm doing counseling is conjoined twins. And so at birth, these are two individuals that are joined together. They're two very unique people who share life in common, at least at the beginning, because at least part of their body is shared in common. And dividing these twins can be quite devastating. It's psychologically or emotionally devastating, as well as physically devastating. So even with a skilled surgeon cutting away at the different parts that hold them together, there's going to be loss, and there's going to be scars. Often those are not very pretty, and they last forever. And they remind both twins of what once was. And in dividing these twins, sacrifices have to be made. The division is not going to be 100% equitable. Choices may leave one child with more wholeness than the other, and reconstruction is almost always needed after the fact. And the rest of their individual lives are now separated twins rather than conjoined twins, and they're aware that they were joined together at one time. In fact, I saw a documentary once of two little girls that were joined at the head. They'd never seen each other, and they were about 18 months old, more or less, when they were separated, and they couldn't sleep apart because they're used to having a presence right above them. So the psychological impact of being separated was profound. And that's what gave me the idea of, in divorce, this rending apart, the separating leaves an emotional wound where you're used to that presence being with you. So while it's more desirable to be separated when you are a conjoined twin, or maybe if you are in a difficult marriage, that's this violent tearing away process, which leaves behind lots of evidence, sometimes leaves a lot of dysfunction. And so, James, more recently than Kathy or I, this process of being torn apart. It's, sorry to say, more recent for you.
Yeah.
And so I'm presuming that there's probably still a major absence for you. It's quite strong. And assuming that I'm right, I'm wondering if you could talk about how you began to start healing from the tearing apart process.
Well, before I do that, let me talk a little bit more about the process itself. I think the conjoined twin analogy is a good analogy. The fact is, though, conjoined twins can only be separated if they're two completely different people. There are many cases where conjoined twins share organs, and in one case, one child has to die in order for the other child to live. And when you look across the impacts of divorce, it truly is an individual case. Yeah, there's some commonalities and some general things that everyone experiences, but your ability to survive through this process is really based on your individual efforts and your individual psyche. And there are people who sometimes literally die through this process, just as the same thing that happens with conjoined twins. The Bible talks about that, for this cause, a man shall leave his mother and father and cling to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And it talks about this is a mystery. I really think that is a statement of a matter of fact. It doesn't matter if you're Christian. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish. It doesn't matter if you're atheist. The fact that you have joined with someone else in a marriage, whether it be a religious ceremony or whether it be a civil ceremony, there is something that occurs. It's just the way we were designed. You become that one person. No one ever gets married with the hope or the aim of getting divorced someday. Okay. Everybody goes in it, I think for the most part, with the best of intentions, with hopes, with dreams, with a vision of where they want to eventually arrive at. But life takes over and life happens. The reality of it is that most marriages will not make it. And even those who are still legally married, how many of those are really healthy marriages? I know that the divorce rate in the United States is about 50%, but I bet if you looked at, the number of happy marriages in the United States, it would probably be, in the low double digits, I would imagine. So people stay together for a whole host of reasons. The ripping and the tearing that occurs is enormously painful, and there is no anesthetic. Yeah, you can kill the pain for short times with drugs and alcohol and new relationships and work and, things like that. But you have to go through the pain. I heard one person put it this way. They said, if you broke your foot, you could shoot it up with Novocaine and you wouldn't feel the pain and you could continue to walk on it. But 6 months later, you still have a broken foot and now you've got a lot more damage than you would have had before. So there's just no easy way around this unless you want to live in a delusion the rest of your life and lose yourself in the process.
So what I hear you saying is you have to go through the process to get through the process. You can't avoid it or go around it.
Yeah, the 23rd Psalm says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. You don't run through the valley of the shadow of death. You don't drive through the valley of the shadow of death. And hopefully you have enough motsy about you that you just don't sit down and camp out in the valley of the shadow of death. And I think it's, I never really understood this till I went through it. I think that this analogy of walking is a very good one, because you got to walk. And there are days when you're scared to death. There are days where you don't even know where you're walking to. There are days where you can't see the end of it. There are days where you actually walk backwards instead of walking forward. But if you keep moving, you'll eventually get out of this. But it's going to take time. Even that part of the 23rd Psalm, again, I think is really highlighting the fact that it is a process.
And a process requires movement. Processes don't sit and wait.
Yeah.
I like to tell most of my marriage counseling clients that marriages are either increasing or decreasing. They're either getting healthier or they're dying. They don't just sit still. I find that to be true most of the time. Now, Kathy, you were blessed to remarry after your divorce, something that I've not done. And
something I was never going to do again.
I sure hear that a lot after a divorce, too. They call that the second divorce, where you divorce yourself from the idea of ever taking that risk again. So if I can ask, when people choose to remarry after divorce, I wonder, does that mean that all the scars and memories have gone away for you?
Absolutely no.
Okay.
They don't go away, because what we experience, it becomes a part of us. That's what helps us to grow and everything like that. So it's not always as painful as it is. There is the growth that can come with it, can be a very positive experience. But in the beginning, I think it kind of defines us as far as who we are. We are divorced. It doesn't so much define us later on. It's something that we have gone through and made it through. A new relationship does not fix what we went through in the previous relationship, and it doesn't help us heal. When we go into a new relationship, we bring ourselves, everything that we've experienced in life. And that's not just with marriages, it's with childhood and everything. So, the scars and the memories don't go away. But when you have your memories, the pain can go away from them. When you have the scars show that, yes, you have healed, but you can still see them. They're still there. They don't disappear. So, and when you're talking about being whole, if you become whole, I was going to say again, but sometimes you're not whole the first time you're in a marriage, and that's why the first marriage doesn't heal. But if you use the opportunity that is presented to you with all the pain and everything that goes through, the breakup of a marriage, you can grow in so many ways. And hopefully when you marry again, you are whole, and you are marrying a whole person. Because otherwise, you start that thing all over again.
Right. You repeat the cycle.
Repeat the cycle. Exactly.
You just said something that I never thought about. So I've been divorced about 11 years, I think. I never really think about the time, but it's been a while. And I was filling out an application for something the other day, or something for the government. I forget what it was. That they asked me what my marital status was. And it says single, married, divorced. And I checked divorced. And when you said it never goes away, but it doesn't define us, you're right. Because when I used to put divorced, it hurt. Now it's just something that is true. But when you said that, I realized I don't consider myself single because the scars have changed me. You can't go back to being single again because you're carrying this history. Even though I think for the most part, I think I'm very well adjusted and healed from the divorce. Some of my colleagues would say no, but they know me really well. But no, for the most part, I feel pretty healed and adjusted. But when you said that, it dawned on me, yeah, I identify as divorced.
But it's something one of the things we hear is divorce is something that you experience. Okay. It's not who you are.
Exactly.
And so I think sometimes we do carry that as we define ourselves by it.
I don't remember who said it, but they said we are not our behavior. We're the people that are managing our behavior. And divorce, amongst all the other things, it's still a behavior. We choose, or it's chosen for us to go through this process, which is a behavior that results in the ripping and the tearing and the rending. I like what you said about the identity. So losses can be big or small, and we all have losses in our lives. There's lots of losses. I'm reminded of in the Bible where it talks about the woman who searching for the penny because it's so valuable to her. Other people can walk over dollars or hundreds of dollars. It doesn't matter. Meaning that we attach to loss is what makes the loss great or small. And for some people, the loss of a marriage is a death. To other people, it's a release, but it still has a lot of cost to it. So it's the meaning and loss that really determines how painful it is. And when the meaning is significant, grief will be activated. Grief is an interesting concept because most people think of it as an emotion. We think, I'm feeling like I'm going through grief, or I feel grief struck. But really, it's a cognitive emotional process. It's a reconciling of losses, and it's encountering the new and often painful realities, and you're comparing them to what used to be there. So your brain is trying to adjust, and it's finding a new definition in self and in life so that you can move towards the future. So grief is a process. It's not really an emotion, but it's connected to a lot of emotion. In fact, we call it a dual process in counseling. The cognitive portion of the dual process is, first of all, grief happens and we feel the pain. We learn to accept it and we plan for a new future. That's the cognitive part where we're making some choices in the way we believe and the way we think. To deal with the feelings means to feel them. We have to honor them, and then we choose to let them go by. I had a professor once tell me it's not having a feeling that's the problem. It's how we hold it or let it go that becomes the problem. And that goes with all feelings, even the ones that people call negative feelings like anger. Anger is natural. If you hang on to it, it becomes bitterness or rage. If you let it go, it was just an experience and a definition of what just happened, but it's not going to consume you. The cognitive side is to learn to accept the limits of your power to control the different variables versus what you have to accept. I know in AA, they have the serenity prayer, which talks about accepting the things that you can't change, changing the things that you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I know I said that out of order, but I'm not an AA leader, so I don't have to know. Learning to restore your life to create a new vision is the cognitive side. And so as we're thinking about this process of grieving, Kathy, I wonder if you could help us understand a little bit how you deal with the emotions of loss and maybe learn to accept and use them in a healthy way regarding divorce, since you, among the three of us, is obviously the more successful.
I wouldn't say I was more successful. I would say that I've just been in it longer.
I'm just teasing you.
I know. But one of the biggest things, because when you talk about the emotions that come up and all that, it's one of the most helpful things. I had counseling. I went to 17 years of counseling with this absolutely wonderful woman who, for a counselor, her name was Sybil, which I thought was awesome. But she taught me so much, because what she taught me about the triune brain and enabled me to start recognizing the movement in myself. So as far as when you're experiencing all these different emotions and everything, one of the things we have to acknowledge what's going on. Okay. And we have to uncover, and sometimes we have to uncover. There's another one that's under another one. And so it's layers, and you peel it, and you're constantly discovering what's going on as far as your emotions. You feel this emotion, and until you know the source of that emotion, you're just feeling it, and you're going with your feelings. You're going with that amygdala or the reptilian brain, which is, I like that name. We also have to accept. We want to run away from our feelings that hurt us. We have to accept this feeling is here. We can't bury it. We've got to feel it. Just like you have to go through grief, you have to accept this feeling. You don't have to let this feeling drive your life or your behavior. But the emotions are real, but they don't need to control you. Sometimes they're so strong, we become our emotions, And so you have to also, when you're going through this, it's like you've got this person that's hurting, so you need to embrace yourself. You need to embrace the feelings that you're having, not say, oh, this is bad, but you can't use them as an excuse either. But you need to untangle them. They're such a mess. You need to untangle them. And then also what you will find what I have found is when I started this process, I was in a fetal position on the floor is probably a good way to describe me. I totally lost myself. I was just a mess. And what this has afforded me, as hard as it's been, I have learned so much, and it's been an exciting journey to find out new things about myself. So your emotions, how do I deal with emotions? Honestly, sometimes when I deal with emotions, I go to almost a catatonic state. No, as far as if I can't deal with them, I kind of withdraw into myself because the fact that can be so painful. But I have to let myself do that. Even that. If you're afraid of what's going to happen, you need somebody. Everybody needs somebody to walk with them on this, somebody safe. If you don't have that safe person, and I was very fortunate in my life to have safe people, but it's an ongoing process.
It is.
I'm not done yet.
And you have to honor the emotions when they come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you said sometimes underneath one emotion's another.
Mm-hmm.
That is the grieving process. Each time you discover something, you have to take it down and look at it, examine it, reconcile with it, take it from the front of your memory and put it to the back sometimes. But as you process one, you find another. And sometimes you find one that takes you back and you have to reprocess one that you thought you were done with.
Oh, yes.
It's a recursive or it's a repeating cycle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So most women, if I can be, sexist, most women are good with dealing with emotions compared to men. Not all, but most. But it's still a challenge. You still have to deal with it. And they can be overwhelming. And they can flood you. Men, on the other hand, are really bad at dealing with emotions for a lot of reasons. So I'm going to look to my buddy James here, because I know he knows that men are less skilled at coping with emotions, by and large, or at least the emotional content. And so I'm going to assume, James, that you are like most men or like me, where there was a resistance in the beginning to feeling the feelings that you had in the beginning. And maybe you found less helpful ways of coping than actually dealing with the feelings in the beginning. And I'm just wondering if you agree and what you might like to add.
Well, grief, as you said earlier, is due to loss. The problem is that you would like to think that you have a ledger somewhere where you can go through and say, okay, this is the totality of what I lost. But that's not really possible. As I mentioned last week about having a house that's burnt down, some things you don't realize you've lost them until you're triggered to go and find them. I think that, at least for me, grief was a loss that was grief was triggered when the loss was greater than my ability to comprehend the totality of the loss. Because if I lose a little thing or something like that, don't experience a lot of grief out there. But when it's so enormous, the grief just came in like a flood. Didn't really know which way was up, didn't know which way was down, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go. And I could always tell when the grief was coming because I would always get angry. Because, the anger was my feeble attempt to try to fight off what the loss was in order to not feel the feelings associated with the grief. But it comes and it washes in like waves. And just as if you were standing in the ocean and you got hit by a big wave, it knocks you off your feet. It tumbles you around. You think you're drowning in your own despair. And then you finally find your footing. And at the early stages of this, you think you're okay, and as soon as you stand up, another wave hits you. Now, over time, those waves get further and further apart, and they get less intense, and you're able to finally start to get some firm footing under you. But initially, you think you're going to die. And Jesus talked about, when Jesus was depressed, and the night that he was betrayed, he says, my heart is, some translations say grieving, some translations say depressed, to the point that he thought he was going to die. Never really understood that or even had an appreciation of that until I went through this process. And there are times when it almost felt like death would have been an escape because the pain was just so severe. The question is, what are you going to do with all that?
That's a good question. And the answer, you actually answered that earlier, is you have to go through the process. You have to be able to keep walking, even when it feels overwhelming.
Yeah, but the problem with someone who's a linear thinker like I am, and a scientist who has dealt with processes all of his career, you think you know what the end of this should look like. But the problem is somebody keeps moving the goalpost.
That's correct.
There is no prescriptive amount of time. In some cultures, someone dies and they go through 30 days of mourning, and they wear black and they have all of these elaborate ceremonies and customs associated with the mourning process, which is a form of grief as well. And at the end of the 30 days, they're supposed to wash their face and put on their clothes and move on with their life. And probably after 30 days, if you have community support and you have spiritual support and you have family support and everybody is there with you, helping you walk through this, maybe at the end of a 30-day, very intensive process, you would at least be able to get to a point where you're functional. The problem with divorce, though, is that you've got all these people that you knew, and the fact is they don't know what to do with you in many cases. They're afraid you had the flu or that you have COVID and they're going to catch it, so they don't want to be anywhere near you. There's other of those whom you have truly disappointed. You know, they're very disappointed in because they had a higher opinion of you than that. And then there are those who just don't care. I mean, it's a, you know, you think about it as being a sifting and a shaking of your family, a sifting and a shaking of your financial records, but it's a sifting and a shaking of your entire life. It's an earthquake. And when you get through this at the end, you'll know who your real friends are, and you'll know who really loves you and who doesn't, because there are no innocent bystanders in this. People are going to react one way or the other. And but that also adds to the grieving process, because it's so difficult at the very beginning to even begin to understand all the things you've lost, all the things you have to grieve. How efficient and effective are you going to be at knowing yourself and working through the process? Because the first thing you have to do is learn how to grieve. And most of us don't know ourselves well enough and have, created a facade all these years that, until you get down to ground level, you're not going to be effectively going through the process to begin with. So it's a long, arduous path.
You packed a lot into that. So your waves that I use the analogy of a sucker punch, because you can't see it coming. And so, yeah, it knocks you down over and over, but you don't always get to anticipate it. And each of these relationships you just mentioned that have to be sorted and possibly lost or reconciled, people's reactions, that's another wave. And so with a death, you have a body to bury and you have a definite end. And so you can get some level of closure where for the very longest time, divorce brings this ambiguity into your loss, and you keep discovering new levels of loss, new levels of grief, and you have to keep reconciling them. And it does take a lot of time. I was thinking about what you're saying as you're talking about the 30 days, of mourning. And that's great. Yeah, the mourning, that's the outward expression of the inward process. But it doesn't, just because you complete that outward expression socially doesn't mean that it's completed anything on the inside. You're still going to grieve until you finish your process. And you're right. Most of us don't know how to grieve. If you've never had a reason to grieve deeply, you really don't know how you're going to react. And we're all different. And there's no time frame or method or stages or anything to the process that can be predicted, except for perhaps the anger part seems to come on for almost everybody in the beginning. But there's so many things that happen beyond anger, and we can't predict them. So this grieving process is extremely individualized. You don't get to choose it. It kind of chooses you based on the meaning of the loss that you're experiencing. It's very different for everybody. It's different in detail. It's different in scope. And ultimately, whether you want to or not, you have to embrace the grief to get through it. You have to allow the hurt to heal. And that's hard. But what I've learned over the years is if you avoid the process of grief, you lock that grief into your life into a perpetual cycle, and it affects all your relationships into the future. There's actually a diagnosis in the DSM for mental health when grief does not complete. We call it complicated grief and mourning, which is actually where grief becomes its own mental illness.
Well, and I think that was the thing that was hard for me, because if you come from most Christian faiths, view human beings is a tripart being, right? Your body, soul, and spirit. You break your leg, the average person in 6 weeks will have healed well enough that they won't notice any residual effects from breaking their leg. Okay. You break your heart, there is no time limit.
And, also when you said break your leg, okay, when you break your leg, you go to the doctor. He puts it in the cast. You follow his directions. You use crutches. You're very careful with that leg.
You may have surgery. Yeah.
When you're going through a divorce, as careful as you can be, there might be somebody else out there, sometimes the other spouse, who's kicking that cast. As you're going through this process, that's what makes it hard in these situations, is because of the fact that you can do everything you can, but you have this outside force that's there that honestly will undermine and do everything they can to, at times, to undermine any progress that you're making. So it's not, when you go through divorce, there's still that person unless you completely cut off all contact from them.
Yeah, but you can't, because at some point you're going to have to see that person again, because you've got to reach some sort of a legal settlement.
Right. And if you've got kids, like my kids were 3 and 7. Okay. So I had a long time of co-parenting that I'm not going to go into the details of that, but let's just say it was a very big challenge in co-parenting because we had completely different views on how to do it. And I'm not going to go there, but it was torture for me. I remember when my son turned 18 years old, that meant no more child support. But in addition to saying to my son, which I did that day, I said, okay, I am your mother. I am no longer your mommy. But I was actually happy that the child support ended that day, because that was a tie to him that he used that every single month in some ploy to dig at me all those years. So my broken leg, and it just came to me as you were speaking about this, my broken leg after I left my kid's dad, I thought I was going to be okay because I was away from him. It didn't end, because he still had something that he could kick me and hurt me. And he used it right up to the last minute.
Unfortunately, that happens more often than not when you have kids, if one of the spouses will not let the conflict go. Mm-hmm. It happens with men, too. I did a research study once years ago about the non-custodial parent of divorce, and that's typically men. It's not always. But in the research, in the literature anyway, in the research, we found that a lot of men stop paying their child support because they can't face the pain of having to try to re-enter the child's life without being able to re-enter their family role, their visitors instead of parents. Mm-hmm. It causes them so much pain and grief that they avoid paying child support specifically so that they get denied visitation and they can avoid the continuing conflict. And it's interesting, as you bring that up, there is no comparable term in our vernacular for a deadbeat mom. We have deadbeat dads. When I was young, I lived in California. They actually put up road signs, and they would list the deadbeat dads on these road signs to embarrass them into paying their child support. I've never heard of a deadbeat mom, but there are a lot of moms who will not pay child support, and a lot of dads who will not pursue it because of their own pride or whatever. But this is a way for the divorce or the marriage conflict, I should say, to keep on kicking the other person. The conflict stays alive. And when you keep the conflict alive, the relationship stays alive, but it's on life support. It's dysfunctional, but it's like dragging a corpse behind you will not bury. It stinks. Well, in counseling, you said something earlier, Kathy, and you touched on it. I didn't pursue it then because I was thinking about it at the end here. But in counseling, we have this term we call the second divorce, which is where people have gone through so much pain that they've sworn off ever getting into a relationship again. I'm never going to take the plunge again. I'm never going to get married again. I'm never going to have a meaningful relationship again. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to avoid another grief or another conflict of the same magnitude. And so they just rule it out. And in doing so, they also are locking themselves into the identity grief, this uncompleted process, because once you've completed the grieving process, you're less likely to try to stiff arm future experiences. And so that second divorce becomes very real. And I remember when I learned about it, it was right after my divorce, and I was thinking, oh, that's me. Mm-hmm. So I had to fight against that. I'd like to ask kind of open conversation for each of you. Thinking about your work in your divorce care groups, do you often find people who are locked in their grief or the marital conflict to a level that you feel that they become stuck and it's obvious to you?
There have been occasions. There have definitely been occasions for that. And what generally happens with the groups is after a period of time, they'll just stop coming because they don't want to let go of it. It's become part, they hold on to this. They've either left something because they had to leave it or somebody has left them. But it's almost like their grief becomes a substitute for the relationship that they were in some regards. They just can't let go of it. So yes, they've been stuck. There's been a few that have done that. And then I've seen a few that has taken them so long. It really has. But they stick with it and they get there after a period of time. But it's easy to get stuck in that. And all we can do is be there for them and be gentle, but firm, and continue to give them that word hope, as far as that they can get past this. And the thing about going to a support group is the fact, these are not just words that they're hearing. These are not the videos or the discussions. They are seeing people in the group. They are hearing from people in the group who have been there where they are, and they're able to tell them person to person that, hey, I was where you are. And so the short answer is yes, some people do get stuck, but they have, if they make the choice, if they have to become willing to let go. And sometimes they may start off with encouraging just to be willing to let go of the grief.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, I think some of this too is, when you go through this, your life has turned completely, totally upside down. Everything that you thought was permanent is gone. You're in a free fall. And I remember just reaching out, trying to grab onto something that would stop the fall. And I think that's where faith comes in. The problem is a lot of people don't have any faith. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are angry at God. They think God should have controlled their other spouse, and that, God should have made their spouse, in essence, a slave and forced them to do things against their will. That's not the way God works. You have free will, and you can't control another person, and God can't control another person either. There has to be a basis for hope. And, if you go through a stage where you're angry at God, you're angry at the only person who can help you. So you're rejecting the only help that exists in the universe to help you get through this. The Bible says that God is near the brokenhearted and that he'll heal the brokenhearted. And there are many scriptures about, people being brokenhearted as being a common human experience. And the power of God to come in and to begin to mend those hearts and put them back together again and to make them better than they ever were before is a real possibility. But I think the people who get stuck are those who reject God, reject themselves, reject the process. And at that point, you're in Dante's Inferno. And for those who want to go there, I would say the same thing he said about, the Inferno, abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
When you don't have hope, you can't have faith. And so one of the tasks of the group is to reinstall some hope. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that is to see other people making it through the process ahead of you. That's why groups are so important. Mm-hmm. I happen to like group for most counseling when I can do it, because the synergy of the group where one person's out ahead really does reinstall hope. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're right. If they give up and they don't have hope, then they give up on God, because God's the only one who can bring that hope back. He does it through his witness. It's very important that we don't give up on the only resource we have. But people who are stuck in conflict, people who are stuck in trying to punish the other spouse, or people who will not go through the grief. They've lost hope and faith, and they don't know that they have any recourse. And so they put all their hope in the dead marriage and the conflict. And it's sad. And it forces them to continue re-experiencing their grief. And that sounds like hell to me. So in your experience dealing with difficult feelings in the group, different people have different extremes, and they have to be confronted. And I know they come out in group. I mean, that's the neat thing about group, is that stuff surfaces that's happening in your real life. It happens in group. I'm wondering maybe some of your experiences working with people who've had these strong emotions, how to help them live separately from their ex-spouse. Is there advice that you offer?
There's one thing. There's a couple examples that are given. One is when the idea of letting go of control. Sometimes they don't even realize that that's what they're doing. They're trying to control their spouse, and they're going, well, could you control them while you were married when all this other stuff is going on? But for some reason they think now that they can. But the thing that they talk about is the fact that you want to punish this person. You're angry at this person. You want this person. You're suffering. You want this person to suffer too. So you put them in that jail cell, to punish them. But they bring up the fact that if you've got them in the jail cell, guess what? You're standing right outside. You can't leave that jail. You cannot leave. You're just as much a prisoner as they are. And so, and also the idea, it's that old thing as well. It's like drinking poison, hoping the other person will die. But in order to begin to live separately from that experience, it's something that we try to say, we try to encourage them to not look at the other person. We tell them this process you're going through, this support you're going through, what we're doing right now is not about the other person. This is about you. It's about you looking at you and focusing on you and to become a whole and complete and healthy person. As long as your eyes are focused on them, as long as your mind is focused on them and what they did to you or what you want to do to them, you can't take care of you. And so I think that's something that is repeated throughout. They hear that again and again and again, but not just from us. They'll hear it from the other participants. But they have to make a decision that this is what they want to do, that they want to become healthy and whole. So you can ask them, what do you want? Do you want to become healthy and whole? Are you willing to do the things you need to do in order to become healthy and whole? And if you do, you might want to look at, can't tell them what to do. You might want to look at, maybe not doing this or not doing that or whatever. And then somebody else in the group will pipe up and say something about it too. But it's part of that conjoined. They're still conjoined.
You said control. Mm-hmm. And when they're trying to control the other person, they actually are defining themselves by the other person's actions and reactions. Mm-hmm. They're not actually being independent. Mm-hmm. And as you're talking, I was remembering a conversation, James, you and I had, it was a long time ago, at least 6 or 8 months ago, about control versus boundaries. And you had constructed your own definition of what a boundary is versus control. Do you remember how you put it? Because I remember it was good. We were talking about, most people think of a boundary as trying to get other people to cooperate.
You have to make a decision. And that is such a valid point. Because you're just awash in the sea of emotion. But you have to move to the front part of your brain and say, I make a decision to heal. I make a decision to get better. I make a decision to have a future. And the emotions will fight you on that. The emotions will be screaming and yelling in your ears that you have no hope. This will never change. You're a loser. You're a total waste. You're a disaster. But it's only by bringing those thoughts under control and forcing yourself to move forward that you actually start to make progress. I think I think it all starts, that cognitive decision, really comes down to forgiveness. And forgiveness of yourself is so much more powerful than forgiving the other person, in my opinion. Because if you can get to a point where you forgive yourself, it forces you to take ownership of your role in this tragedy. It forces you to look at the things that you did wrong, to look at your shortcomings. It gets your eyes off of the other person and gets your eyes back on you, because you're the only person you can control. And by starting to learn how to forgive yourself, you start to learn how to then love yourself. And when you start to love yourself, because you realize that God loves you and that you are actually worthy of love, because when you start going through this, and you talked about the second divorce, it's because, you feel like you're trash. You feel like you're garbage. You're not worthy of love. But when you start to understand that God has forgiven you and that he's deemed you worthy of love, and then you can start to begin to forgive yourself, well, then you start a growth process where all the stuff that the other person did just doesn't matter anymore. It is not worth your time and your energy, because, and I'm not talking about narcissistic love. I'm talking about truly loving yourself. And from that love of yourself, actually being able to express love to others, which then just reinforces the love you have in yourself and the love that God has for you. It's a very self-reinforcing positive cycle. But it starts with this cognitive decision to step away and out of the emotions and to start to set a new vision for who you are and where you want to be and where you want to go. And that really begins with beginning to understand and accept how God sees you.
And I think when you're saying that, one of the things that is key in this, we're talking about our experiences, we're sharing ideas and stuff, but one of the key things to healing, any kind of a healing, is God, is your relationship with God. If you have that relationship with God they talk about as your center, that's where the center is. Your life revolves around him. Then when these other things, peripheral things happen, it doesn't rock your world, because they talk about if you have your job in the center, that goes away. Your orbit, goes wacko. You have your family in the center, that goes away. Your orbit goes wacko. But God is the one thing that is constant and can stay constant. So honestly, one of the biggest things in dealing with people going through this is the opportunity that they have, and the opportunity that we have to help them on their path, their journey with God. And so many times, honestly, at the end of this, that is what you see. You see somebody going through this tremendous pain, going through this resistance and everything. But then they come to this point where they're going, wow, I've never had this strong of a relationship with God in my life. I hate what I went through, but where I'm at right now. So we can, when we work with people, we can pass on what we've learned. People can share with them. But until they have that relationship with God, they won't be fully healed. They can do all the work. That is the key part.
That is actually the part that when I'm working with marriages, I try to reinforce, because if the God relationship is healthy, your self relationship can be healthy. And if your self relationship is healthy, then and only then can your marriage relationship be healthy? So it always comes back to the source. If we had that in the right order, marriages wouldn't be failing at 50%, but we don't.
Well, I think that, that's what these podcasts are supposed to do. We're supposed to be Christ's hands and feet. We're supposed to show love. And that's what these groups do, is that, we love people who they believe are unlovable. We help people who they believe are beyond help. We are supposed to be Christ's hands and feet. And he said, how will they know you're Christians? Well, they'll know you're Christians by your love. So much of this is just the power of presence. St. Francis of Assisi said, always preach the gospel. Only use words when necessary.
I've always liked that. Well, I think it's clear from the discussion we've had so far that divorce is an emotionally violent process. Even if you've chosen it for yourself, or even if you think that you desire it, all the stages of divorce from the start to finish are directly affected by the intensity of the meaning of each of the various losses. And those losses, some of them are simple, at least seemingly simple, such as companionship, but they can be very complex, like the unique hopes and dreams that you formed in your own special vision of what future was supposed to look like with your spouse, with your family. Perhaps it's the identity, the raising a family and being part of their lives forever that's now lost. The more meaningful each of these losses, the more intense that grief is going to become. And we've discussed that grief is a process of the mind, but it's felt as an emotion. And the emotional state that we tend to label as grief is not really the primary emotion. It's just the way we express a constellation of emotions. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our expectations, they all go together to produce this process. And it's expressed usually in depression, loneliness, anger, fear, lots of different things that we can latch onto. These are the ways that we personalize our own grief response. And knowing that these are symptoms or indicators of grief, it can help us to better prepare dealing with it, either during the process, even before the process, but sometimes long after the divorce. You still have to recognize the loss and anticipate and accept all the flooding that comes with it. And knowing that healing requires you to do some work. As James was saying, you have to keep walking through it. You can't sit down in the valley of the shadow of death and expect it to get better. You have to keep moving.
Well, that's a really good point, Chuck. You've heard the saying, time heals all things. Well, that's just not true.
That's correct.
If you've got a splinter in your finger, time is not going to heal that.
That's right.
You've got to make an effort to get rid of the foreign body, and then time will heal. And so this is the same thing. You can sit back and live your life, but time's not going to heal the pain of your divorce. You're going to have to make an active effort to go seek that healing for yourself.
The only thing that time really does is it gives you the opportunity to practice and to make that effort and to explore. And eventually, with enough time and enough work, it starts to become more tolerable to you. But you can't expect it to happen overnight, and you can't stiff arm it away. It has to be embraced. So while it's painful to go through grief, it's absolutely necessary. And denying loss, as I explained earlier, just complicates it. It can actually end up becoming a mental disorder. It can cause you to condemn yourself, or condemn yourself to living in a life where you are perpetually grief-struck or angry or unable to move forward. You're unable to have relationships. And despite what you may have heard about things like the 5 stages of grief, it is not tidy. It's not linear. It's very messy. And I know after last week's show, Kathy, we were talking about that, and you and I agreed on this. I've not heard many people say it the way you said it, which is the same way I usually tell people about it being messy. So I'm just wondering about when you say it's a messy process.
Well, it's a messy process, but also I think sometimes when we're going through the healing process, of course, we want to go point A, point B, done. We want it over. Okay, now I've done anger. Now I've done depression. Now I've done this. I've done that. Oh, I'm done with this. I can move on.
I feel the next stage moving in.
Yeah. But what happens is there's a term that they use also is like you're going along, and you know what? You when you first start this, you're such a ball of pain. You can't imagine life without pain. But then you start to feel a little better. You start to say, I'm making progress. And you go along, and then something happens, and you're slammed back. And you hear people say, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That is depressing. You're not getting anywhere. You're going backwards. But one of the things that somebody said to me, I can't remember who it was, a long time ago, was the fact that picture this, because when I can picture things, it helps. Picture this: you're going along, you're making progress, and then something happens that you need to pay attention to. You need to do some work on. You need to let go of whatever it is, and it throws you for a loop. Now, the thing about it is, if you picture this line, this linear line that you want, you come along and you loop back. But if you look at that loop, when you're going through that loop, you're not moving backwards. You're still going in a forward motion, but you're working through something that you have to work through. You don't fight it. And then you go along and you're going, okay, things are getting better again. Boom. Next thing you know, you're in another loop. And as time goes on, what happens is those loops, as you go through them, for one thing, recognizing, saying to yourself, I'm not going backwards. I'm just in a loop right now. I've got to ride this out. It does something to you. It gives you hope, I guess. And as time goes by, the loops get further apart, and they may get smaller. You may go through them a lot faster. But that's part of the process that you have to give yourself to. But I will tell you, I don't know how many people would say to me, Kathy, I don't want to hear about looping again. I got it. I just was in a loop. But for me, the visual was very, very helpful.
So grief is messy. It's unpleasant. It's unpredictable. And the only way to get through it is to go through it. And nobody wants to go through it because you have to deal with those unpleasant emotions. And you have to renegotiate the future. And that's a lot of work. But being realistic about that future and having new goals is what actually allows the grieving process to complete. I know we're running short of time, James, but I wanted to ask you, what are some suggestions that you offer group members to help them navigate the grief? Because we all know it gets messy.
Well, I think, a couple of things. Number one, it all comes down to perspective. Okay. And grief really is a cathartic process. And think of it as a way of shedding the baggage. You can't carry this baggage with you the rest of your life. It'll destroy you. You won't have a life. By grieving it, you're able to let it go. And by letting it go, you become a little freer each time you go through that. Because ultimately, where you really want to be, I think, is to be free and to be at peace. You have to let this stuff go through the grieving process in order to achieve that freedom and achieve that peace that you're really hoping for and that you're really searching for. Nobody said it was going to be easy. I think another part of this, too, is that, you may have been married 10, 20, 30, 36 years, but when the marriage ends, it's like a really bad traffic jam because that whole 36 years gets piled up on a single point in time and things are crashing into each other. And, think of it like, you hear every now and then these car wrecks where there's 100 vehicles that crash into each other. That's what divorce is like. Everything was moving along reasonably okay. And then boom, 100 cars piled up behind each other. In a natural process, think of how long it would take police officers to go through and fill out accident reports on 100 cars. But you got to go through and re-examine and analyze and grieve at least the years that you were married. And if you're really smart, you'll go back beyond the marriage and grieve the pain and the trauma and the losses that you had before then, because those pains and traumas and losses are what caused you to choose that person which you're now divorcing from to begin with. So is divorce horrible? Yes. Does God hate divorce? Yes, the Bible says so. But I believe the reason that he hates divorce is because he loves us so much he doesn't want to see his children go through this level of pain. But it provides you an opportunity to become the person that he intended you to be. To go back from your earliest memories, and now in some cases even in utero, and deal with the traumas, to let that stuff go, to heal, and to become a completely whole person. And that's a very freeing process.
Mm-hmm.
You've also made a compelling argument not to try to do it alone.
Yeah.
So we've only touched the surface of healing really tonight, but hopefully you've listened and you've heard that there's work to do. But if you allow yourself, you can be free from the intensity of the trauma and heal the hurts. The scars are going to remain, and sometimes parts of the grief will take longer. And it's okay to hope for a better future. But it's even better to start imagining a better future. So as you grieve the past, remember to look forward to a better tomorrow. Next episode, we're going to be talking about one of the most difficult barriers to navigating and surviving divorce. We're going to be talking about coping with anger. Anger has a tendency to produce 3 common self-destructive outcomes: the inability to let go of hurt, the swearing off of any future marriages, and trying to fill the emotional void with new relationships before your healing has actually completed. Before we close, do either of you have any parting thoughts?
What we've talked about so far sounds very dark and very grim. And there's a reason for that, because it is. This is not meant to discourage anyone from getting a divorce. This is meant more to inform you of what your realistic expectations should be. Neither is this advice on how to fix your marriage, but interwoven through all of this is advice on how to fix yourself, because that's the only thing you can really fix. Families are dynamic systems. You cannot change yourself without other people in the family system changing in order to compensate for the changes that you've made. The goal is for you to become whole. The goal is for you to become healthy. The goal is for you to be free and to live in peace. Other people will adjust around you if you do that. It's not easy. It's painful, but it's very, very well worth it.
And whether you make the choice to stay in the marriage, whether you make the choice to leave, sometimes there's no choice. It's something that has to happen. But the thing about it is that you take a long, hard look at yourself. You come to know yourself. You come to work on yourself regardless of whether you stay or go. If you stay and you work on yourself, and the other person does too, you can have a healthy marriage. If you leave, so you can't get away from yourself, basically.
Yeah, wherever you go,
there you are. You know, whether you stay in your marriage or whether you leaving the marriage isn't going to make you any better.
I'd like to thank Kathy and Dr. James for joining me today on the couch. And if you'd like any more information on DivorceCare, you can find them at DivorceCare.org and be connected to a DivorceCare group near you. You may also contact me by visiting myvbcc.com or emailing me at drchuck@vbcc.email, or you can call my office 757-759-5674. Counselors on the Couch is brought to you by Virginia Beach Christian Counseling, specialists in family counseling, grief, trauma, and loss. Find us at www.virginiabeachchristiancounseling.com. Counselors on the Couch is produced and directed by John Bell, executive producer Dr. Chuck Carrington, with original music score and mastering by John Tyler Music. The opinions expressed here are of the host and the individual guests and are not necessarily the opinion of Virginia Beach Christian Counseling. If you would like to make a comment or would like to ask to be a guest, please go to counselorsonthecouch.com.